The ink they call dirty. That tattoo belongs in a prison, not in a family restaurant. The words cut through the morning clatter like a knife. Dean Phelps, a city councilman in Asheville, North Carolina, didn't even lower his voice. He said it loud enough for every booth in Eagle Diner to hear, loud enough for the old man at the coffee machine to flinch, his hand trembling as he reached for his glass of water. Calvin Merrick, 84, wasn't a man who responded to insults. He had heard worse in the jungles of Cambodia and in the years since, trying to walk quietly through a world that forgot who he once was. But this morning, on Veterans Day of all days, he wasn't just being ignored. He was being erased. His left sleeve rolled slightly past the wrist, revealed an old tattoo. Faded by time and sun, but still legible to those who knew a dagger pierced through a gear. Not military issued, not decorative. This was personal, a seal inked by blood, carved by brotherhood. Dean shook his head and called over the young waitress. "If he makes one more guest lose their appetite, I'll call the health board myself." Emily hesitated. She had only been working at the diner for 2 weeks. She wasn't from Asheville, just moved here after college. But she saw the look on the old man's face, heard the silence in his eyes. Still, she obeyed. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, almost a whisper. "Would you mind sitting out back? We're kind of full in here." Calvin nodded once. No argument, no complaint. He picked up his tray, scrambled eggs, already cold, one slice of toast. He gripped his cane with his left hand, balancing the tray in his right, and then step by step made his way toward the rear door, past families' laughter, the scent of bacon and syrup toward the dumpsters. Outside, the wind caught his coat. It was an old brown military issue from 19knit, a button missing near the collar, the lining torn. His pant leg on the left stopped at the knee, where a metal prosthetic creaked slightly with every step. Behind him, nobody looked, except for the child at booth 7, who asked his father, "Why is that man walking funny?" "Shh," the father said, pulling him close. "He's just one of those old war guys. Don't stare. Now here's where I need your opinion. If you had been there, right there that morning, would you have said something? Would you have asked, 'Sir, are you okay?' Or would you have just kept eating like the others? Let me know in the comments. Because what happened next, no one expected." Calvin sat near the back gate, his tray trembling slightly on the metal table. The wind was stronger here. The garbage bins clanked every few seconds. He didn't care, not really. This wasn't about food, it was about a promise. 53 years ago, in a muddy forward camp in Cambodia, James Harrington had looked Calvin in the eye and said, "When we get out of this mess, burgers. Eagle Diner, my treat." James never made it home. Calvin did. So every year on November 11th, he came. Never for the discount, never for thanks. Just a burger, just a seat, just memory. Today, though the inside seats weren't for men like him, Dean Phelps stood inside sipping coffee, scrolling his phone. "It's not my fault these guys don't look like veterans anymore. No ID, no medals. Just sad old men with jailhouse ink. But that ink, that tattoo was sacred to 8 men. Only 8. All part of Shadow Logistics, Seal Bravo 1971. Each man got it burned into their skin the night before what was meant to be their last mission. A silent pact, a bond beyond paperwork. Now maybe Calvin was the last of them. Back inside the diner, the bell over the door rang. A man walked in, late 20s, tall, clean-cut, black jacket hair, cropped high and tight. Ethan McClary, SEAL, just home from Bahrain. He had come to Eagle Diner for coffee and eggs. What he saw instead stopped him cold. Through the window outside near the dumpsters sat an old man with a tray, wind rustling his coat, left wrist resting gently on the table, tattoo exposed. Ethan's eyes locked on it. His chest rose. Then Baul? He froze. The gear, the dagger, the ink of legend. He had seen it once, only once, during SEAL orientation. A black and white photo. No names, no details, just a caption. Logistics Chief. Shadow Bravo. Saved 17 men. No record exists. No record. But the ink was real. And now? It was right outside. Ethan didn't speak. Not yet. He turned slowly, scanning the room. He saw the waitress standing still. He saw Dean Phelps laughing at his phone. He saw what they had done. Outside, the old man looked down at his toast. One bite gone. His hand trembled, but his face calm. Because Calvin Merrick didn't need recognition. He needed silence. He needed to keep a promise, alone, if necessary, but not today. Ethan took one step forward, and everything was about to change. Cliffhanger. Ethan reaches for the door. Outside, the old man is wiping his mouth with a napkin. Ethan's hand presses the door handle hard. His other hand rises slowly toward his brow. And we fade to black. Would you recognize a legend if he sat beside your trash bin? The code beneath the skin. You can buy a fake SEAL badge, but you can't fake that ink. The door slammed shut behind Ethan McCleary as he stepped outside. The sound startled a few nearby diners, but most didn't look up. No one expected what was about to happen. Not Dean Phelps, still scrolling through his phone. Not Emily, the young waitress, frozen in place behind the counter. And certainly not the old man sitting beside the dumpster, shielding his tray from the wind. Ethan stood still for a moment, boots planted firmly on the concrete. His gaze locked on the tattoo. He didn't need to ask. He knew. That wasn't just a design, that wasn't some barbed wire copy from a discount parlor. It was real. He had studied it during orientation. The dagger through gear, Shadow Logistics, SEAL Bravo 1971, a unit so obscure most veterans hadn't heard of them. But Ethan had. "Sir," he said, voice low, almost reverent permission to speak. Calvin Merrick looked up slowly. His eyes were pale faded, like old glass, but steady. He gave a small nod. Ethan stepped forward, stopped 1 foot from the table, then did something no one had done in years. He stood at attention and saluted. A full formal SEAL-grade salute. Inside, the sound of forks halted. A mother mid-laugh paused, napkin to her lips. A child pressed his face to the window. The air itself seemed to still. And that's when Dean Phelps spoke again. "What's that kid doing?" he scoffed. "Chasing ghosts." Ethan didn't break posture. He held the salute for several long seconds, then let it fall, his hand clenched in a fist. "Sir," he said again, voice louder now, "did you serve with Shadow Bravo?" Calvin blinked. "Long time ago. Cambodia. 1971, and Calvin gave the faintest smile. "Someone's been reading old files." Ethan knelt beside the table. "Sir, your name." "It's Merrick. Calvin G. Merrick. You're the one they talked about in training. They didn't tell us your face, just the tattoo." "You're the ghost," Calvin chuckled. A dry sound rusty like a shed door opening for the first time in decades. Back inside, Emily dropped her tray. Eggs and toast scattered across the tile. She turned to Dean, who sat back smugly in his booth. "They're putting on a show," he muttered. "All for a story no one can verify." Ethan heard that. And stood. He turned to the glass, gestured toward Dean. You just mocked a man whose logistics maps saved over a dozen men during Operation Red Dust. Men who would have bled out if he hadn't rerouted airlift through a collapsed supply lane." Dean scoffed. "There are claims and there are records." Ethan opened his phone, pulled up a document. "This was declassified 5 months ago. I downloaded it straight from the DoD archive. Calvin Merrick, call sign Hollow Gear, responsible for recovery ops under non-communication protocols. Credited with the survival of Shadow Bravo and Echo 4. He turned the screen to the window. People inside began to lean forward, but Calvin wasn't watching. His eyes were far away again, in the trees, in the heat, in the night. I remember smoke, he said softly, and screaming. James was point man. He tripped it. M9 anti-personnel mine blew his legs out from under him. I dragged him 50 yards. Then the chopper landed. Ethan lowered his head. Sir, that tattoo. They told us never to forget it. They said if we ever saw it in the wild, we were to stop and salute. No questions. Inside, silence gripped the diner. Emily opened the door, slowly stepped out. She carried a fresh cup of coffee. Steam rising, her hands trembled. She placed it gently in front of Calvin. My dad, she said. Her voice cracking was James Harrington. Calvin froze. The napkin in his hand stopped mid-wipe. He looked up at her slowly, eyes widening. You're Jimmy's girl? She nodded. He always said someone saved him in Quezon, but wouldn't say who. Said the man walked away without a word. Calvin reached into his coat, pulled out a folded photo, edges curled from age. In the picture, two young men smiled beneath camouflage netting. One had his hand on the other's shoulder. Emily gasped. That's this place behind them. Calvin nodded. We swore we'd meet here if we made it back. Ethan stepped forward. Sir, the country owes you more than a discount and a dumpster seat. Dean stood now, fuming. All right, enough of this circus. I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, but this isn't the place. Ethan cut him off. This is exactly the place. This is where his story began. And now it's where you tried to end it in shame. Emily turned to the window. If anyone in there still believes in respect, maybe now's the time to show it. The old couple near the front stood, quietly walked to the door. Then another, then a man in a veteran's cap. One by one, people exited the diner and formed a loose ring around Calvin's table. No applause, just presence. Calvin's hands shook, not from cold, from something deeper. He wasn't used to eyes, he wasn't used to being seen. You're still here listening. That means something. If this moment has stirred anything in you, comment the word honor below. Just that one word. So we'll know who still remembers. And if this story matters to you, consider following the channel. We're not done. This isn't over, because what Calvin said next, no one was ready for. Emily, he whispered, he died saving me, but I never told his family. I never told anyone. Until now. She knelt beside him, tears slipping down her cheek. Then tell me, she said, tell me everything. And as the wind shifted and the clatter of the diner faded behind them, Calvin Merrick began to speak. What would you do if you saw a forgotten hero sitting behind the trash? The salute, heard through the diner, that tattoo. It trained every SEAL you've ever met. That was the moment everything broke. Ethan's voice rang through the open air loud enough to shatter whatever illusion still lingered inside the diner. Whatever apathy had filled the booths, whatever ignorance had been shielding the smug faces, it was gone. All it took was that line. One sentence, one truth too heavy to ignore. Calvin Merrick, the man sitting quietly behind the dumpster, wasn't just a forgotten veteran. He was the blueprint. The man whose life had become doctrine. The man whose ink trained warriors. Inside, silence expanded like a wave. Coffee cups paused mid-air, spoons hovered trembling. Dean Phelps, the city councilman who had mocked the old man just minutes ago, now stood frozen near the front counter. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Outside, Emily was still kneeling beside Calvin, clutching the photo he'd kept hidden for over 5 decades. Her hands shook. She had asked for the truth, and now that it was pouring out, it came heavy like rainfall after drought. He covered the blast with his body, Calvin murmured. I only lost my leg because he shielded my heart. James was always the brave one. I just mapped the way out. Ethan stepped closer, eyes damp but steady. Sir, you saved Echo 4. Well, with nothing but hand-drawn coordinates and a broken radio. They still teach your method at Coronado. Most recruits think it's theoretical. None of us imagined the man behind it was still alive, still walking among us, eating cold eggs by a trash bin. From inside a chair scraped the floor. Dean Phelps stepped forward, face pale. He looked out the window and saw the crowd forming outside. Not a protest, not a mob, just people watching, listening, witnessing. I didn't know, Dean said, voice trembling. I didn't know who he was. But Emily turned toward him, fire in her voice. You didn't ask. That's worse. The door opened, slowly, reluctantly. Dean walked out into the cold morning, adjusting his tie. His pride clearly hurt more than his conscience. Mr. Merrick, he began, I want to apologize for, but Ethan stepped between them. Don't, not yet. He turned to the gathering crowd. Everyone deserves to hear this, not just as apology, but as lesson. Calvin didn't speak. He didn't need to. Ethan pulled out his phone and hit record. Then he turned to face the crowd and, more importantly, the camera. This is Calvin G. Merrick, he said clearly. He's the man behind the untraceable extraction protocol used by Shadow Bravo during the Cambodia campaign in 1971. The tattoo on his wrist? That's not just decoration. It's the mark of 8 men who swore to never leave each other behind. 7 of them are gone. He's the last one. A murmur rippled through the listeners. Someone gasped softly. Another whispered, my uncle was in Echo 4. Dean shifted uncomfortably. Look, this whole thing got out of hand. I didn't mean any harm. You did, Emily said, standing now. But you didn't think there'd be consequences. Dean's lips parted. For once he had no script, no politics to hide behind. Is there anything I can do? He finally asked. Ethan turned to Calvin, silently letting the old man decide. After a long pause, Calvin looked up. Yes, he said. Sit with me. Dean blinked. I'm sorry. Sit with me, at this table, by the trash, where you put me. That silence returned sharper this time, cutting, deep. Dean hesitated, but then, perhaps out of shame or self-preservation, he obeyed. He sat down across from Calvin Merrick, knees stiff, gaze lowered. And then the unexpected happened. A group of 3 veterans, seated inside minutes earlier in silence, exited the diner. One by one they approached the table, nodded to Calvin, then saluted. Not performative, not loud, just quiet, reverent, earned. Emily looked at Ethan, eyes wide. They recognize him too. They all do now, Ethan whispered. Every man who served under that doctrine knows who he is. They just never thought they'd meet him. A boy stepped forward, 11, maybe 12. He held something wrapped in a napkin, a small carved wooden coin with an eagle etched crudely into it. My grandpa said to give you this, he said softly to Calvin. He said he wouldn't have made it home if not for hollow gear. Calvin's lip trembled. He took the coin with shaking hands and held it to his heart. You've stayed with us this far. That means you see what most people overlook. If you believe men like Calvin Merrick deserve more than cold eggs and forgotten seats, comment the word respect below. And if stories like this matter to you, follow our channel so we can continue telling them, because too many voices like his are fading. Dean finally spoke again, eyes low. I'll resign from the council, if that means anything. Calvin stared at him long and hard. I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask for recognition. I asked for a warm seat and a little dignity. You couldn't give me either. Dean nodded slowly, then stood, walked away into the street, and no one followed. Emily refilled Calvin's coffee. Tell me more, she said. About James. About the mission. I want to know. Calvin didn't smile, but something in his shoulders softened. He looked out at the people who had gathered. Some stood with hands over hearts, others with tears in their eyes, and a few just stood silent and still like soldiers waiting for the next command. As Ethan placed the phone down, still recording, he whispered, "This isn't just about the past anymore. It's about how we treat the living. Would you sit next to a man the world tried to erase, or would you stand and salute?" The promise behind the scar. The ink was our bond. It meant no one gets left behind. Calvin Merrick took a slow breath and placed the carved wooden coin in the center of the table. Around him, the world was finally quiet, not the silence of dismissal, but of reverence. Emily sat beside him, not saying a word, simply listening. Ethan stood nearby, guarding the moment with eyes sharp but soft. No one interrupted. No one dared. And yet inside Calvin's chest, a storm still brewed. "James always told me," he said, voice rough, "like gravel we'd make it back together. He even carried a photo of this place in his pocket. Eagle Diner. We circled it on a map, made a deal. Burgers when we're home." Emily leaned closer, her fingers curling around the edge of the old photo still on the table. "You came every year?" Calvin nodded. "Every year since 1972. One burger, one empty seat across from me." He tapped the wood gently. "This coin is the first time someone sat down." The wind stirred through the parking lot, carrying the scent of frying bacon from the diner and the faint rustle of leaves. But no sound could cover what Calvin said next. "It wasn't just a mission," he whispered. "It was a death sentence." Ethan stepped forward. "Tell us." Calvin looked up. "You sure?" Sir Ethan replied, "We're not here for the medals. We're here for the truth." So Calvin told them. Back in 1971, deep in the jungles along the Cambodian border, their unit had been cut off after a botched intelligence drop. The radio was jammed. Command believed them already gone. And yet, with hand-drawn maps, Calvin charted a hidden extraction path over mud trails, river crossings, enemy patrol lines. It was only supposed to take 6 hours. It took 3 days. James Harrington was point man, always ahead, always steady, until the blast. One wrong step and the jungle exploded. "He looked at me," Calvin said. "Just looked. No scream, just eyes." I crawled to him. My leg was hanging. He was already gone. Emily closed her eyes, tears lining the edges. "My mom never told me how he died." "He died saving me," Calvin said, "and I never told anyone. I didn't want his memory tied to my survival. I thought if I kept the promise, it would be enough, but it wasn't." Emily whispered. "No," he admitted, "it never is." Just then a woman stepped out from the diner, holding a folded flag against her chest. Her name was Nora Wallace, a retired VA nurse who had overheard every word. "I remember you," she said softly to Calvin. "You came into the VA clinic once in the 80s, refused benefits, said others needed it more." "I didn't want to be a name on a file," Calvin answered. "You should have been," she said, eyes filling. "You should have been at the front of the line." She placed the flag down beside the coin. A hush settled again. From across the parking lot, a man in dress uniform began walking toward them. He was older, dignified, with silver trim at the shoulders, Rear Admiral Thomas Keane, just back from a memorial service nearby. He'd heard about the commotion. He had come to see it for himself. When he approached, he removed his cover and extended his hand. "Calvin Merrick," he said with clarity, "you are known to me. Shadow Bravo, Operation Red Dust. You are one of the reasons I am here today." Calvin looked up, stunned. Sir Keane smiled gently. "You don't remember me, but you rerouted a supply crate to our unit when we were cornered in the Phuoc Long province. That crate saved 30 men. I was the last one to climb into the bird. Calvin's hand shook as he reached out. The two men shook hands in full view of the crowd. Ethan turned on his camera again, gently capturing it all. "You gave us a chance to keep fighting," Keane said, "and now it's our turn to stand for you." He motioned to his aide. Moments later, a black SUV pulled up. From inside, a folded citation, long overdue, wrapped in gold trim. A commendation signed quietly by the Secretary of the Navy years ago, intended for a logistician whose name was lost to time. Calvin's name was handwritten in ink. Ethan read it aloud. His voice shook. Calvin G. Merrick, for exceptional valor in establishing and executing emergency extraction protocols under hostile conditions, resulting in the survival of SEAL elements Echo 4 and Bravo Shadow. Your service, though unrecorded, was never forgotten. The audience applauded, not thunderously, but with the solemn rhythm of gratitude. Emily stepped forward, holding the citation. "I want this framed," she said, "not in a museum, in this diner." Calvin smiled for the first time. It was small, tired, but real. "If you've been watching until now, you already know this isn't just a story. This is memory. This is debt. If you believe forgotten veterans deserve to be remembered, type the word NEVER in the comments, because never again should a man like this sit alone beside the trash." A voice called from the back of the crowd. It was the diner's owner, Mr. Lancaster, red-faced, sweating. "I didn't know," he said. "Please let him back inside. The best table, free meals for life." But Calvin shook his head. "I'm not looking for charity," he said. "I just came to keep a promise." Ethan knelt again, same as before, saluted. Only this time he wasn't alone. 5 others in civilian clothes stepped forward. Former SEALs, Marines, 1 Air Force combat controller, all had been watching online. They had driven from nearby towns when the live stream went viral. All of them had served under protocols designed by a man they never thought they'd meet. Now they saluted too. 6 hands to their brows, 1 heart finally seen. What happens when a man who never asked to be remembered becomes impossible to forget? The street that carries his name. He never asked to be remembered, so we'll never forget. The town of Asheville had never seen a silence like that. Not after a parade, not after a funeral, not even after war. 6 men stood at attention before an old veteran sitting by the dumpster behind Eagle Diner. Calvin Merrick, who once guided others to safety through gunfire and jungle, now found himself surrounded not by danger but by recognition, and still he said nothing. Because when you've lived long enough being invisible, the weight of being seen is almost too much to bear. But the world was seeing him now, and it wouldn't stop there. The footage from Ethan's live stream had gone viral overnight. It had reached veterans forums, newsrooms, congressional inboxes, and most importantly, living rooms. Sons watched it with their fathers, granddaughters with grandfathers. Many cried, some stayed quiet. Others wrote letters to their local towns demanding a change. And the very next morning it happened. The mayor of Asheville held an emergency press conference. Her voice cracked slightly as she stood at the podium with the city seal behind her. Calvin Merrick sat beside her in a dark blazer, the old brown coat folded neatly on his lap. "Today," she said, "we correct a mistake, not just of 1 morning, but of 50 years. The mayor unveiled the new street sign. Bold, clean, white letters on navy blue, Silent Service Way. A nod, not just to Calvin, but to all those who served quietly, carried nations on their backs, and were never welcomed home. The camera cut to Dean Phelps, no longer in a suit, no longer in power. Just a man in the crowd, hands in pockets, eyes down. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence now meant something different, something earned. Shame has a weight to it. And now he was carrying his. Beside him stood Emily, holding her father's flag, James Harrington's legacy, now intertwined with the man who survived him. "I never knew what kind of man my dad died beside," she whispered to Calvin. "Now I do." Calvin reached over and took her hand. His fingers were calloused, trembling, but warm. "He was better than me," he said. "I just kept the promise. And that's why you're remembered," she replied. The city installed a bench near the diner's entrance, bronze, strong, with an engraving of the dagger through gear tattoo. Below it, just 8 words for the ones who walked back alone. Ethan returned to Coronado the week after, but something had changed in him. The other instructors noticed. His salute was slower, his voice deeper. And when new recruits asked about the man with the tattoo, he told them everything. Calvin's story became part of the official curriculum, not just for SEALs, but for everyone who wore the uniform. It wasn't about glory, it was about grit, quiet loyalty, the kind of honor that didn't need parades. 3 months later, Calvin passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had made it to 85. The town held his funeral at sunrise. Veterans from 8 states arrived. Some wore uniforms, others worn jackets like his. 6 active duty SEALs carried his coffin. One of them was Ethan. At the burial site, Emily placed a worn photo on the casket. The one James had carried in his pocket, stained from war, folded at the corners. The Eagle Diner circled in red. Next to it she laid a small napkin. On it a note in blue ink. Burger. 1972. Rain check kept. As the flag was folded and handed to Emily, Ethan spoke the final words. His silence trained us, his scars guided us, and his name will live long after ours fade. You've stayed with us to the end. That means you felt what we felt. So if you believe that quiet service deserves loud remembrance, type the word always in the comments, so that others scrolling by will stop and remember. Because in the end, we all become memories. But some memories build roads, and some roads carry names. And now every child who walks past that street sign, every old veteran who pauses on that bench, will know that once there lived a man named Calvin Merrick. He asked for nothing and left us with everything. So here's the question. What if the quietest person in the room is the one who gave you the right to sit there? Don't forget him. Don't forget any of them. This was Silent Service Way. And this story isn't over.